Shabbat Shalom. Can y'all hear me? Ken and I have been in Oregon for a wedding, and then we were both sick. Up. Do you want my mic closer or farther away? Closer. How's that? Okay. So hopefully he's home live streaming because he's a few days behind me in recovery. So if I don't hug you, that's why. But I'm not contagious. But anyway, Shabbat Shalom. Rabbi Joshua is obviously not here this Shabbat, and so he has allowed me to bring the message this morning. And I want to talk about the Aaronic Blessing. So first of all, to see if you guys are, I don't need this, do I? I already have this. To see if you guys are awake, this is my first slide. You don't have to go very far before you find an error in it, but it had some information in it that I wanted. So I'm going to give you about all of 3 seconds to find the error, and then I'll tell you what it is. You can't see it. All right, that's a good excuse, Paul. Okay. All right. It says where it's from. I borrowed it from Hebrew Roots' mom. And it says the Aaronic Blessing. And right under that, it says, Numbers what? Okay, but those are the verses, there's no chapter listed. It's Numbers 6, 24 to 26. Okay, in any case, for the most part, I like this slide a lot because it has it in English, it has it in Hebrew, and it has the Hebrew pronunciation. So I thought it was a good way to start. Okay. I want you to think of this blessing as a powerful weapon for your spiritual arsenal. So most of you would probably agree with me that we are in spiritual warfare every day because there is an evil one who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so here is an opportunity for you, maybe you already do, but to add a weapon to your arsenal. So this is commonly called the Aaronic Blessing. And for those of you who like English, it's not the ironic blessing, which is what it might sound like. It's also called the priestly blessing. It has many names. It's called the raising of the hands blessing, the raising to the platform blessing, and there are several other variations, but we're just going to stick with the Aaronic Blessing. I think I grew up calling it the Aaronic Benediction only because it was used at the conclusion of many church services. Okay, so let's put the giving of this, number 6, into historical context. And we're reading about that in 6, where the Israelites are experiencing their newfound freedom. They had just been in Egyptian slavery for a very long time, and now they're experiencing freedom. They're in the Sinai wilderness, and God is giving his children instructions for their new lifestyle as free people. And in addition to giving instructions to all the people, he also had directives for the priesthood. And one of the instructions was a command to bless the people with very carefully chosen words. So later in the land, when they finally get there, this prayer would be said over the people at the conclusion, benediction, of the daily prayer and sacrificial system that was held every morning in the temple. So that's kind of a nice way to start the day, huh? Getting blessed. So, but current day, twice a year at Pesach and Sukkot, a mass priestly blessing takes place at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Tens of thousands of people gather for this. I don't know how else to say it. It's probably a pretty wow event. I've never been there. And they receive this historic blessing from hundreds of descendants of the high priest Aaron. That's some picture, huh? Okay, so not only are these words very specific, but also the way that the hands are held when giving the blessing. So those of you who know your Hebrew alphabet might recognize that as the letter shin made with two hands. And so this would be without the guiding arrows. So the letters, why shin? Because that represents the name of God, Shaddai, which we normally translate into English as Almighty. So back to the Western Wall, I would love to be there some year for that blessing. We have it said over us every week from the Bema. So I want to take this blessing piece by piece, line by line, and see what it can mean in our lives, in your life. So it starts, speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, thus you shall bless the people of Israel. You shall say to them. All right. So it's always good to ask a few basic questions of a text before we dive in. So first, who's speaking here? God. And who is God speaking to? God is speaking to the high priest Aaron and to the priests who are descended from him. And God is telling them to do something very specific, to do something. God is speaking to the one, Aaron and his descendants, who will impart the blessing eventually to you. So let's start with a pictorial overview. In Hebrew, each verse is progressively longer. The first line has 3 words. The second line is made up of 5 words. And the third line contains 7 words. Okay. Despite that first slide, this is the second error in that first slide. It showed it in 4 lines, but whatever. I didn't create that slide, and if I could have, I would have fixed it, but I'm not that techie. So each line represents the name of God, Yud, He, Vav, He, translated in English as Lord or Yahweh, and sometimes Jehovah. This name of God is called the Tetragrammaton, which literally translated means 4 written letters, Yud, He, Vav, He. I'm not teaching on the Tetragrammaton today, but I just think it's interesting, so I'm going to take a little side trip. Rabbi Joshua takes side trips, so I'm going to take a little side trip. He's my role model. We would write this, Yud, He, Vav, He, as 4 English consonants, Y, H, V, H. This is a sacred name of God, considered by many Jews as too sacred to even be spoken. So, in reading scripture, many Jews, when they see Yud, He, Vav, He, substitute the Hebrew word Adonai. And you can hear that has absolutely nothing. Adonai has absolutely nothing to do with Yud, He, Vav, He. Some scholars believe that it was originally intended to be pronounced something like Yahweh, but we'll never know because no one preserved the vowels that accompany these 4 consonants. So today we use Adonai in reverence and in unity with the wider Jewish community who have been doing this thing since the Second Temple period or New Testament times. So God is saying, this is the way you shall bless them. The words of the blessing must be pretty powerful. We can make up all kinds of great blessings, and I don't discourage you from doing that, but why not use the ones that God has specifically given us? So let's unpack them. The blessing is phrased in the singular you. The Lord bless you and keep you. You singular, not you plural. It's a personal blessing addressed to the needs and desires of the individual. You. It's a blessing of a loving God and Father to each of his children. It's addressed to you. In this short blessing, the name of God is mentioned in each of the 3 lines, emphasizing the fact that all blessings come from the Lord. He, God, rather than the one saying the blessings, in this case it would have been the priests, God is the source of all goodness and blessing. The Kohen Hagadol was originally the only one who could pronounce the priestly blessing over God's people. He was traditionally required to do so barefoot, based on Exodus 3:5, while fasting, and holding his cleansed hands in the specific position of the shin. And according to our Rabbi Joshua, this is still the practice in some synagogues today on festival days. According to Jewish tradition, the divine presence would shine through the spread fingers of the high priest as he blessed the people. So what is that? I don't know. What does that have to do with the price of eggs? Listen, don't look. Use your ears, not your eyes. Therefore, no one was allowed to look at the high priest during the blessing out of respect and awe for the power of the Almighty. Pretty cool. I don't know. We look at the rabbi when he blesses us, at least I always have, and maybe I've been missing something. I'm going to change what I do, so I don't know. Anyway, each line represents repeats the name of God, and then gives us 2 of the 6 elements of the blessing. The first line, consisting of 3 words in Hebrew, the Lord bless you and keep you. The blessing starts out with what I personally consider the most interesting of the words in the blessing. The word bless is the Hebrew verb barach, which, according to Strong's, literally means to kneel down. Wait a minute, God is doing the blessing. Is this suggesting that God is kneeling down? This is a picture of the great God of the universe, the creator God, the sovereign God, the omnipotent God, the omnipresent God, the omniscient God, bending down to touch his children, to touch you. God humbles himself to bless those he loves. Love comes down to bless. Does that remind you of anything? That's exactly what God, did in Yeshua the Messiah. A beautiful picture of Barach, bless, in the Brit Chadashah, is Yeshua at the last Passover, where he knelt to wash the feet of his disciples. I and the Father are one. He who sees me sees the Father. Get it? What a picture. Okay. Bless. What a picture. And keep you. This is not just a general blessing, but a specific blessing of protection. Asking the Lord to protect, as the priests ask God to keep or shamar you. These words have the sense of guarding or watching or protecting someone. It was used in Genesis 2 of the first couple's call to keep, shamar, the garden. And it's used of the charge given to the Israelites to keep, shamar, the covenant. But here we see that God is the one who is called to protect, guard, cultivate, nourish, and keep, shamar, us. Okay, more modern day. At that time, it would have had a very practical application because Israel was surrounded by enemies. Not much different than today. And God had promised to protect them as long as they were faithful to him. While we hope and pray for physical protection in all its forms, we know that God has not promised that. And in fact, according to the book of Timothy, he's promised us persecution. You'll find that in 2 Timothy 3. However, Shaul has told us that God has also promised that nothing shall be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Yeshua the Messiah, and that's in Romans 8. Think on this for a second. The timeline seems to indicate that Paul penned this while sitting in a Roman prison awaiting his execution. What kind of protection is that? But Paul was confident that God would rescue him, keep him, shamar him. According to the historians Eusebius and Ignatius, the way Paul was safely transported to that kingdom was by execution. Not what we usually think of as protection, but God's ways are not our ways. So maybe I personally should stop whining because I don't always like how God keeps me. The root word, Hebrew word for keep here is shamar, which literally means to hedge about with thorns. The picture painted by this word is a sheepfold in the wilderness. See those sheep in the middle, and they're surrounded by thorns. It would not be uncommon for a shepherd to be out with his flock, away from the safety of camp overnight. And in order to protect his flock, the shepherd would construct a corral of thorn bushes. He must have had pretty tough hands. It was kind of like a mini fortress. The shepherd would then guard the flock, and the corral would be a fortress of protection around them to keep out predators like wolves. The sheep were protected and guarded from harm. And God is our fortress. He's our keeper. So taken together, this first line requests that God gift his people with love and protection. The Lord bless you and keep you. The next line, comprised of 5 Hebrew words, the Lord make his face to shine upon you. Face in Hebrew is panah, which actually refers to the entire being as revealed in their face. The God of Israel desires that his children seek his face, seek his entire being. The psalmist said, when you, Lord, said, seek my face, my heart said to you, your face, Lord, I will seek. So this obviously isn't just suggesting that we search for the skin on his skull, on God's skull, but that we seek for his entire being, and that in return his entire being would shine on us. So let's talk about shining. The idea of shining is connected with or, light. Light is always a good thing. Light overwhelms darkness. So picture this. When a person sees a loved one, his or her face, we say, lights up, shines. Want another picture? This is my favorite. Don't miss it. Have you ever watched the face of a bride and groom as they see each other, probably for the first time that day, as the bride enters the sanctuary and her groom is waiting up front for her? Can you picture their joyous faces? This blessing is asking that God's face lights up the same way when he sees us. Yeah, I want that. In contrast, in Deuteronomy 31, God tells us that in response to our sins, he will hide his face from us. So this part of the blessing is God asking for God's presence, his acceptance, his favor, despite everything. I don't know about you, but I still sin. Occasionally. Well, frequently and maybe every day. But this blessing is perhaps even a request to help us not sin, so that God is not required to turn his face from us. And isn't that one of the reasons he gave us his Ruach, his Holy Spirit, to keep us from sinning? God desires to be in fellowship with each and every one of you, each and every one of his children. So this part of the prayer is asking for his delight in us. Again, if I understand the timeline correctly, then the timing of this prayer is asking for his delight. The timing is really quite shocking when we consider what took place just a few weeks before. Aaron, namesake of this blessing, had just led the people into making a golden calf. And the Torah portion that was read today said, a molten image. Don't do it. The people had just engaged in idolatry. which, by the way, is one of the things that will cause him to hide his face from us. So we're praying for God's delight despite everything. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Gracious in Hebrew is kanan, literally to show favor to someone. It also means to be merciful, exhibit compassion, be considerate of, have pity, or demonstrate a longing for. So, God's rebellious, imperfect people did not deserve the priestly blessing, but he gave it to them anyway. That is because of who God is. Loving, forgiving, giving. Each time the Israelites turned away from the Lord, he promised to treat them with mercy and compassion if they returned to him. For the Lord your God is gracious and merciful and will not turn his face from you if you return to him. 2 Chronicles 30. So don't forget timing. This was while Yeshua was giving the 10 words or the 10 commandments to Moses on Mount Sinai. And what were his people doing? Making a golden calf to worship. God may have been up on the mountain with Moses, but at the same time, he could see what the people were doing at the bottom of the mountain. Now that is great grace, unconditional love. So the priest is asking, at God's direction, that God be merciful and gracious to us even when we are in sin. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you, or some translations say, turn his face towards you. This may actually be an idiom, a saying meaning to look at you with peace and blessing. We've already talked about God's face shining on us, right? And this continues that same theme of the face of God. So it must be pretty important. It carries the idea of his people receiving his full attention and God acting on behalf of his people, on our behalf, on your behalf. The nations surrounding Israel believed in gods that could be distracted by other things, much like we human beings can be distracted. And those gods had to be summoned, awakened, roused to action. Wake up! So that's the background for Elijah taunting of the prophets of Baal in 1 Kings. Many pagan religions were designed to attract the attention of the gods and entice them to act on behalf of their worshipers. This is not what that is saying. When the people of God were faithful to God, his face was towards them, because God neither slumbers nor sleeps. There is something within every human being that desires to be seen, to be looked upon, to be known, to be delighted in. God knows that. He made you that way. He made you with that desire. Just think how you feel when you're talking to someone and they're distracted and not giving you their full attention and not making eye contact with you. This prayer is asking that God would look upon us, his people, that he would notice us, that he would hear our prayer, that he would respond and rescue. The result would be that they, who were hearing that, we, you, me, we would have intimacy and peace, which brings us to the final element of the Aaronic blessing, and give you peace. Shalom, peace. Peace is more than the absence of welfare, which we pray for in Israel, right, every service. Peace is always desirable. Absence of warfare is always desirable. Shalom means that all is set right. It means to be made whole, to be complete, to be walking in contentment. It comes from the root word shalom, to make restitution or amends, to restore, and make even better than the original state. It is rest, tranquility, prosperity, health, and an overall sense of well-being. This final part of the blessing lets us know that God longs for his people to be made whole. It is the God of the Bible redeeming our past and restoring what the enemy has stolen. Did you hear that? redeeming our past, and restoring what the enemy has stolen. So they shall put my name upon the people of Israel, and I will bless them. So we need to consider the Hebrew concept of name, Shem. The word Shem is related to neshama, or breath. One's name is connected to one's very being, one's breath. Names are very important in Hebrew, not so much here in America. If God places his name upon a people, then he places his very being upon them, his character and his worth, his power and his presence. The name used in the biblical text in Numbers 6 is the sacred tetragrammaton, which I took a little side trip to before, Yud He Vav He. This name is used of God in the Old Covenant scriptures more than 6,500 times, more than any other name for God. Refers to the one true God. So what does this name mean? If names have meaning in Hebrew, then what does Yud He Vav He mean? It's usually translated, I am that I am, or I am, I was, and I will be. But let me muddy the waters a little bit here, because I love grammar and I love language. In Hebrew, Yud He Vav He is apparently a verb. A verb. Aren't names usually nouns? Yes, but apparently not in this case. So very like God not to fit our grammatical rules. The root of this word is He Vav He, meaning to exist or be. So the name Yud He Vav He has something to do with existence or beingness. And that existence and beingness is not something over and done with, but exists now and presumably existed before and is also going to exist after. So you can kind of see how a translator might end up with, I am that I am. I can live with that theology. But not all scholars think this is a particularly good translation. Oops. Others believe it should be translated as he causes to become. That would seem to fit quite well with God's being the creator of all things. Okay, so kind of mysterious. So you shall put my name upon them, and I will bless them. So for God to put his name on his people is quite possibly a Hebrew idiom meaning to share the reputation of someone. Seems that God intended for the Israelites to share his reputation so that they could convey God's character to the nations and the peoples around them. Since God desires to be known upon the earth, and he allows us humans who know him to represent him to others, then this priestly blessing is not only a call for God to bless his people, but also a call for his people to rightly bless others. And how well are you doing at that? Do you rightly represent God to others? Do others see God in you? Okay, think of it this way. And you're going to have to work. There's work at the end of this. Think of it this way. There's a progression in the Bible of who was allowed to give a blessing. At first, only God had the authority to bless. He then extended it to some of the patriarchs, then to the priests. Revelations 1 says that Yeshua's blood makes us priests to God. And remember, Galatians 3:29 says, and if you are Messiahs, then you are Abraham's offspring. So that means we can bless people in his name. So I want us to try this as a congregation. I'm going to divide you guys in half, including the control booth up there. You don't have to push any buttons, so come on down. I figured this was going to be the longest part of this, getting them out of the control booth. And we're going to just divide the congregation. You can be on either side you want. Divide the congregation in half. You can do this in English, Spanish, Hebrew, I don't care, whatever you're most comfortable in. But we're going to say this blessing. We're going to pronounce this blessing on the other half of the congregation. If you, for some reason, are not comfortable giving the blessing, then hold out your hands and receive the blessing. But just remember that enough of you need to give the blessing, because otherwise you're all just recipients, and it's going to be pretty quiet in here. Okay, so stand up. And it's only about 30 words. If you need it, it's up there. I think most of you know it by now. You've been here long enough. And we're going to say it. And we're going to bless each other. So face each other, look at each other, make eye contact with each other. Hold your hands if you're comfortable, or don't hold your hands, whatever you're comfortable with. Oh, see, some of you could do it. I can't do it. On one hand. That's me too. I could do it on one hand. So hold your hands up if you can. Hold your hands out to receive the blessing, or just stand there and ask God to speak through you. So you ready? The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Ah! So now you're done. Well, you're not done. Now you're going to go out. And in your everyday life, say this over people. Say it over your children. Say it over your grandchildren. Say it over people you love. Say it over people you don't particularly like. Bless people. Try using it to bless people in your life. It's only 30 words. You hear it every week. You've read it numerous times. You can do this. Be a blessing to others. Shabbat shalom.